Hello, welcome. Infernal, what's up? What's up? Yeah, it's been I hope yours was nice too. It's just been stressful with family, a lot of food. Hope everyone has gotten through it. Mine we've got family in town, so it's ongoing. But yeah, I hope you're having a nice holiday weekend for everyone out there. There's a few holidays going on actually, so that's cool. Uh welcome, welcome. For let's see what's going on today. I'm gonna do more philosophy roulette. We can get Anna a shout out, assuming things work. Oh no, it didn't work. Wow, interesting. Oh, I was hungover yesterday. That's good. Sounds good. I wonder why the shout out's not working today. That's an interesting thing. Let's see. Some people it just doesn't like. Let's try again. No. All right. Well, whatever's. There's what's it called? The Twitch API actually is there we go. Do it manually. The Twitch API yeah. Um has something weird about some names, like some users don't work as well. There's a workaround that I could use to fix it, but I just was like, I've never run into it before. I don't know how common it is. It's not worth it. So, yeah. If you have any topics you want me to go into, like I'm happy to, look into different philosophy topics and see if I can get a paper in that area. But yeah. For anyone who's watching this, I mean, I do post to YouTube later, so you're gonna see these links. Infernal does like gaming, but also does chatting, teaches like sociology things. So, smart person, and you can go hang out there for chill gaming and like fun chat, learn stuff. But yeah, so let's see, what do we got? I can't do the plurality of evolutionary worldviews. What the heck is that? Biosemiotics by Nathalie Gontier. Well, if it's not available, I'm not doing it, but like, let's take a look. Because unfortunately, biosemiotics unfortunately takes might be a lot too science. Oh, this is a short paper. I wonder what this means. I'm tired tonight. We're going to do this. Oh, it's a commentary. I see. You know what? Let's do this real fast because, hey, why not? Even though it's a reply article. But, like, that'd be fun for now. And, screw it. Good times. Yeah, things I gotta fix. Oh, forgot about that. Yeah, I gotta fix the font in this area. But whatever's. Let's see. Let's grab the. Did I hit save already? I think I did. So, might as well do this. If anyone out there is interested in said paper, here is the link, which will be. It's right here. And it will be in the description below if you're watching later on YouTube, or you can always type exclamation point paper. That's exclamation point paper, and if the bot's working, which it is, the link will pop back up. So, cool. So let's read this. It's a short paper. It's only 6 pages long, and yeah. Yeah, look at this. See that? That's a burn from taking brisket out of the oven. My dad's brisket out of the oven. I clipped the handle with my elbow and burnt myself. I was like, what's hurting my elbow? It's like, oh yeah, I burnt myself. Fun times. Okay, so little quickie right here because I'm exhausted and it's just be a warm up. Hopefully, I'll get to more later. But anyway, brisket. No, it's this giant piece of beef that he slow roasts in the oven, basically, in like a in sort of like this sauce, and so it's like this like meat that like it wouldn't really be, maybe it's a good piece of meat, but like you slow cook it, and so it's like slow cooked with like vegetables and spices and liquid and like broth, and so then you get like this sort of the meat just sort of like becomes really tender and you can break it up and it's really good. So no, it's trying to think of any what would be more like, it's just more like a yeah, it's more like a really good piece of steak, brisket, like slow cooked steak. Yeah, slow cooked beef. One of these days, I know they have like a giant like barbecue festival or beef like grilling festival down like Argentina. I'd love to go do that one year and just like eat all the steak. It would be so good. It's like, I mean, even in New York, apparently, you have to know about these things, but like, there's like weeks where like they just like, or days where they just they block off certain like roads, and then all the people with like, smokers and grills and everything come and have like a big like steak fest. I just need to do this now that, we can go outside and do things together again. So, yeah. Anywho, as always, feel free to ask questions about this stuff. This is my first time reading it too, so whatever. I'm going to try and figure out what the heck is going on. Evolutionary biologist Golden Lewontin, evolutionary epistemologist Gontier and Brady Woktits, nice, Woktits, like that name, von Glazerfeld, and biosemioticians von Uxkull. This is a real interesting book, this 1937 one. If anyone doesn't know it, it's got cool pictures and everything. This is a real fun book, the von Uxkull. Have demonstrated that organisms not merely adapt to an external world, but that they actively construct their environment. Odling and Smee, sociocultural, Leland, and cognitive niches, von Glaserfeld and Magnani. Well, see, I don't quite know what this person means by biosemiotics and Infernal. So this is what we're going to try and figure out. And that's kind of the reason I picked this paper, because they were using big words. So I was like, I don't know what that means. I mean, biosemiotics is like the name of the journal anyway. Like, the name of the journal is Biosemiotics. So I'm not even sure. It's probably sort of something to do with life and the way... Yeah, life and semiotics, like symbols. Life and symbols. I don't know. So, we'll find out. Okay, so, yeah. In this eloquently written paper, and thereby building upon von Uxkull's 1937 concept of Umwelt, Dennis Noble demonstrates that such is no different for those organisms that engage in science, and more specifically for those scientists concerned with delineating the scientific dogmas and practices of evolutionary biology. Noble thereby touches upon important debates in the politics of science and the conscious, as well as often subconscious role that language and metaphor play in the development of scientific worldviews. Okay, so here's what I think is going on. The Umwelt, this is why I was saying that anyone who quotes this von Uxkull from 37 is going to be talking about the Umwelt. The Umwelt is this sort of like, you only can see what your biology allows you to see. So like von Uxkull like drew these pictures, like what we might see in a certain picture, like a field, is not the same thing as like what a bee sees, because like bees have different eyes, and that's very different from what a tick sees. A tick has much less input, basically. Their senses are much weaker than even like them compared to a bee. So like they only get like little stars and like different like senses. So their whole world is very different and siloed off in some sense than what we see. So what we're talking about here is, and even us, the way we look at science is siloed off compared to different Well, that's what I think they're saying, is that we are siloed off in certain ways and we can't look at the world. That's what I think this is what. So we've got evolutionary worldviews, and so the way we're looking at the world is sort of siloed off. It's like sectioned off from other worldviews. So I think that's what we're doing right here. So I don't know, but like, so this is why we're saying there's things develop scientific worldview. So we've like got different ways to see the world, and they get developed in different directions. This recalls the work of philosophers such as Ludwig Wittgenstein, Thomas Kuhn, and Michel Foucault, who have long demonstrated that beyond data and facts, language, games, scientific practices, and regimes of power underlie the scientific discourse of what is defined as normal science, truth, and falsehood. Together, these phenomena underlie the formation of a scientific niche that defines the Umwelt of scientists and provides both a territory and a roadmap that come with an entire code of conduct on what ideas to accept and reject, what phenomena to investigate and ignore, and which methods and tools to apply in the process. Yeah, so this is what we're saying. The Umwelt of the scientist is governed by their technology at the time, and their technology allows them to investigate certain things, but not other things. And if their concepts were different, then they would think of analyzing different stuff, but like their technology and their concepts limit them in certain ways, and that's good because it gives them insight into certain areas, but it also blocks them from doing other things. Okay. In congruence with these Umwelts, the multifaceted school of evolutionary biology has brought forth a myriad of evolutionary worldviews. When writing his Origin, for example, Charles Darwin relied on Malthus' economic work of population growth. Parallels have also long been drawn between his ideas on selection and Adam Smith's invisible hand metaphor that founded the latter's free market ideals. And interpretations of natural science have led to the idea that selection results in the survival of the fittest, or that it supports the idea that nature is red in tooth and claw. This phrase is taken from Canto 56 of Alfred L. Tennyson's poem that was actually written 9 years before the publication of Darwin's work, and that at the time was more of a response to Robert Chambers' work on the vestiges of creation, where the transmutation of species had already been discussed. Nonetheless, the phrase is often used as an illustration of how selection operates. I want to be fair, like, I've looked a lot at the structure of science. The idea that, like, nature red in tooth and claw, that, like, things are just terrible. I mean, yes, things are terrible quite often, but the whole world is terrible. But you can look at it from the other side. It's like the ones that get along together also do much better. So you can say, like, the ecosystem, when it's like in proper balance and all the animals, yes, sometimes they get eaten and whatnot, but a lot of times it's in a better sort of state, then the ecosystem flourishes and things aren't just dying out. They're all sort of just like becoming more and more, like, you know, like a rainforest is getting more and more diverse, more and more like lush with life. And so the red in tooth and claw is a metaphor, and it's kind of true, but, you know, if you look at it from the other side, you can say everything that sort of gets along better and doesn't like throw the whole system out of whack, then that's also sort of how this works. So the survival of the fittest is a very individualist thing, but that's not how ecosystems work. It's survival of the whole ecosystem. And then, you know, the fittest ones in any small subset kind of do better on average. But, like, it's not like a winner takes all. That's not how any of this works. There is no winner takes all in evolution. So, yeah. Okay, so now we're moving out of the 1800s into the modern synthesis. The modern synthesis continues this association with liberal and individualistic discourse, and this is one of the reasons why it has, following Darwin, emphasized that the organism is the unit of selection, and why it has subsequently experienced so much difficulty to, even within its own animal-focused science, accept the possibility of altruism, or parental investment and sexual selection, as well as kin, group, or multi-level selection. In fact, the idea of group selection was only able to integrate recently, and it did so by considering the group as a single superorganism. Yeah, so this is exactly what is going on. You think that the metaphors you use are just sort of metaphors and they're not real, but it's not true. The metaphors really can limit the things you look at. And so when you're looking at like parental investment, you're saying, well, why does that matter? Why do parents like their kids? And if you're only focused on the individual, then it doesn't make sense. Or altruism doesn't make sense. If you're thinking about groups, then maybe altruism does make some sense on the whole, but it's a singular, like a single, you have to look at the superorganism of the group, as they said here. Again, this is because you're stuck in this very economic model. When you're doing this economic model that looks at individual like gains and losses, then you can't look at anything else. So I'm not sure where this is going. But yeah, we'll find out. As already argued elsewhere, this language of combat and the glorification of individualism that associates with the neo-Darwinian worldview is also one of the reasons why it has been so difficult for both the paradigm and its adherents to accept the important insights that come from symbiology. Just because symbiologists introduce a more interactional discourse when they study mutual and commensal, but also parasitic interactions among organisms that belong to different species, they have been associated, if not accused, of propagating socialist, communitarian, or communist thought. Consequently, while an ant colony might justify as a superorganism, recognizing individuality, agency, or system properties in macroevolutionary phenomena such as holobionts or Earth has, for many, gone too far. Yeah, so this is, again, if you're looking at symbiotic relationships, it's very hard for the like traditional sort of biologist or Darwinian to understand symbiosis, because you have to look at two organisms at once. And if you're looking at two organisms at once, then you don't have one organism. It's like, well, they teamed up. Well, how do you understand how they teamed up? There is no teaming up when it's an individualistic theory. I mean, of course they do it, but it becomes harder and harder, and then it's funny, and I agree with this author, sometimes you get these weird accusations of like being socialist, as if the this like individualist theory of Darwinian evolution doesn't sort of fit in with the the 18th century like hyper capitalism that was growing at the time. And that's eventually what Marx criticized. On the other side of the hierarchy, the microevolutionary-oriented neo-Darwinian school that developed after the founding of the synthesis has dethroned the organism, as well as the man of the Enlightenment, as the progressive unit of selection that natural history scholars has proclaimed it to be. Instead, both were replaced with selfish genes that ride disenchantment, postmodern vehicles, and such has come to associate with the lobbying for militant atheism. Yeah, exactly, Infernal. These ideas got transferred into the organic sort of science. Even though like you wouldn't think they did. Like this is exactly what happened. It's just this paper so far is running a quick history on sort of what the social theory did to the scientists. Yeah. And so now, instead of you're going on the organism, you're going to the suborganism, which is the genes. Yeah. Now there have most certainly been scholars such as Kropotkin that understood the law of mutual aid as an alternative to the gladiator show, as there have been eugenicists such as Fisher that saw in natural selection a justification for class differentiation and sterilization programs. There have also been sympathizers of Marxism such as Gould and Lewontin. Yep, see, these people know that this is what's going on. And Levins and Lewontin that have in association pleaded for a more dialectical biology. And there have been those that find joy in their affiliation with the biological world, such as E.O. Wilson. It thus appears inevitable that evolutionary thought as a human science has developed by looking for a mirror in nature of human society. Such is no different for the field of ecology that commenced by investigating the industry and household or economy of animals, and how in their societies, too, are characterized by a division of labor and a distribution of goods. Even Van Beneden developed his ideas on a nutritional symbiosis by analogy with how messmates Commenso share their food. I don't know what that is, but I guess messmates might be people in the military. It sounds like, someone on a ship, a mess, like a ship mess. Okay. Noble's work demonstrates that genetic trait theories have also strongly depended on informational and computational jargon. It is the adoption of an information metaphor that enabled Dawkins to understand genes as software or as replicating informational codes, and organisms as hardware or programmed vehicles that obey algorithmic rules of conduct. It is the adoption of communication theory that enables the central dogma of molecular genetics to proclaim that information flows, and that it does so from DNA to RNA to proteins, where a series of messages become decoded, transcribed, translated, and where from the 1940s onward, an army of war veterans return to science and commence to unravel life's hidden secrets, as they have done so before with the secret intelligence they were able to intercept from their enemies. Who's saying this? Okay. Yeah. So this is interesting too, because it's not like the computer metaphors are innocent either. These sort of computer metaphors have a lot of history built into them, just from a different history. A lot of information science, like library science, are built into these sorts of ideas where you've got, books are translated and transcribed. Messages are flowing back and forth. Ideas are going around. So you've got a different history that's coming in here. And so I guess that got pulled in the 20th century when they were talking about genes. The problem with this information narrative is that there is hardly ever such a thing as a standalone, factual, or objective information that is just broadcasted out there and ready to be intercepted. Rather, for something to have information value, that something needs to be observed, recognized, communicated, produced, understood, or otherwise interpreted, and any of this always involves a construction. This is like, maybe they'll get to this, but you have to even take it further than a construction. It's embedded in a living system. So any sort of thing that we have here only makes sense within our system. So one of the most difficult problems in these areas is the generation of new life. New life has to have ectogenesis, has to have the right sort of structure for a new organism to grow within. You need to have in a mammalian woman, a female, that's the only place you can, have a new baby. It doesn't work otherwise. And of course, people are trying to make, amniotic, external amniotic sacs and all sorts of things, so you can have a matrix style pod to grow a human in. But the idea that information is separate from any sort of interpreter, you can't do that either. And so the whole idea that it's in just a construction is it's not really a construction. It's in a much more complicated system than just having it in sort of embedded in a convention that are conventional construction. It's got a whole way of life associated with it, with biology and society and all sorts of stuff. Okay. Rant over. This has long been recognized by evolutionary epistemologists and biosemioticians alike, both of which were thereby inspired by Wiener's feedback loop that linked a system's output back on its input. Yeah, so that means people have to converse dialectically, and that's the only way to understand the conversation. That feedback helped paved the way for recognizing downward causation by going, for example, from cultural systems to individual organismal members, and it helped recognize autopoiesis in cognitive agents. In hindsight, such constructivism was even present in behaviorist schools of thought, where the habit-to-instinct idea defended by early ethologists and evolutionary epistemologists can be compared to Waddington's canalization in epigenetic landscapes. Okay, I know none of that made any sense to any of you, but let me explain what that sentence meant, because that sentence that was exactly what I was talking about, and this was all shorthand for it. You can't grow a human's the flesh and the stuff does not grow. Thank you, Cryo. Cytoarchitect, sorry. Not Cryo, but Cytoarchitect. the like your it's like your fingers, you have your fingerprints on them. These things only get generated by the way the cells are rubbing up against them in when the body's growing. And so, your fingerprints are stuck, but that only generates in like the sort of the swirls of like the amniotic sac when you're a baby, or not even a baby, you're before that. So that's what Waddington's canalization and epigenetic landscapes is. Canalization is this sort of system that only takes place when you are already growing. It's not in the DNA, it's in the super system of the baby growing inside its mother, and then with the different parts of the bodies rubbing up against themselves. There is no way that this could be written into the genetics, and there is no way that it is only from the outside system. It's just like the whole thing, and we do not have a good explanation for exactly how all of this works. But it does work. This is how things happen, so we can describe it. And so the idea that you can actually understand the whole thing by looking at the code in the DNA is just dead wrong. And they've known it since 1942. That's what this line right here is. It's basically, we've known that it can't actually be only the genes since 1942. Because Waddington basically showed that you can't do that, and it's the truth is just how things are. So, yeah. So this is why it's not just you can't just reduce the problem to information, because it's a much more complicated system. Yeah. Hey, and yeah, so if you got questions about that, I know this is actually a really hard concept, because people want to think that, how we're grown is sort of written into our DNA. It's not. It's how we are grown. Oh yeah, and the other part of it is, if you are not grown in the right sort of space, like a fetus is not in the right sort of egg or whatever, or placenta or things, you will not grow. You will not grow into a human. And so it's not even so much that you will things won't be the way you think they are. No, you will not actually live if you are not inside the system that is sort of within looping back on itself. So you only grow in certain sorts of people only grow in certain very restricted environments correctly. So it's much more complicated than just your fingerprint. It's a lot of the things within your body have to be sort of pushed together in the right way. And if it isn't pushed together in the right way, it doesn't happen. And so how do you say push together in the right way in genes? It doesn't actually exist. So this is a linchpin thing right here that people who look at this know about, but it's a very complicated idea that other people don't appreciate is going on. So if you have more questions, let me know, but yeah, I'll try to explain. And this resurrection of neo-Lamarckian and epigenetic ideas of inheritance in turn got countered again by gene and population genetic views endorsed by sociobiologists. And the neo-Lamarckian is, of course, Lamarck is the prior theory to Darwin that said basically when something wants to be this way, it has some internal drive. That's how it grows. That's what stretches the giraffe's neck, because it wants to reach up. And so, and the epigenetic means it's not just the genetics, it's things that change the way the DNA and RNA act on itself when they're making the proteins. And so it's not just the DNA, but it's sort of the flags in the system. So there's things that happen during your life that actually change how we are making proteins, and how we are affected by the environment, and how that affects our internal structure. So it's not just the code, but it's the flags that get turned off and on, and that's what the epigenetics is. It's complicated things. Okay. Noble shows that constructivism has also entered molecular genetics and biochemistry, where the important work of Barbara McClintock and James Shapiro is demonstrating that the genome-wide capacity for natural genetic engineering. There is a feedback loop that turns the genome onto itself, and such implies a form of reflection from system onto its parts. Such neither occurs in a narcissist nor selfish way, but in the form of repair, adjustment, and expansion. Natural genetic engineering implies that there exists knowledge or semiosis from a molecular level onward, and this idea finds root in evolutionary epistemology and biosemiotics. As disciplines, they thereby go back to the founding of pragmatism that alternatively is known by the name of relativism, where scholars first start the scientific study of worldview formation and of worldview pluralism, and such, at last, feeds back onto Noble's principle of biological relativity that incentivizes us to recognize evolution as the outcome of a myriad of mechanisms and processes that, beyond reductionist and one-way causal views, require a nested view of organization, which is a view that links to hierarchy theory, and with which I most certainly and wholeheartedly agree. All right, this was a huge amount of like word salad here, but basically it's saying, look, you can't actually pin down any one location of evolution because at every level there is a feedback loop. That like, and this is like a really quick history of what has like happened in every area of like biology and like the related fields, is that you find there's feedback loops everywhere. And once you realize there's feedback loops everywhere, you can't say there is a bedrock level that is sort of evolving. There are these multitudinous processes that undergo evolution, but then they feed back on themselves, and it's not so clear where the evolution is then because it's happening, but there's no base level. And so you've got like evolution on the genes, but then the way our bodies are formed macroscopically and what happens to our bodies during our lives then actually reflects on the next generation, and that isn't reflected in the genes but in how we are formed, and that makes a difference too. And that's a form of genetic inheritance or evolutionary inheritance, what happens to parents and like bodies over time that we that is not recorded in the genes, but in the shape of our bodies that is affected by the world. So yeah. So you can do that there. You can do it in molecular genetics. You can do it in the way Waddington is the way like things grow, and like canalization is how things are formed. And then, of course, you can do it at they were saying also at the, macroscopic level of, how organisms affect their landscape and then how the landscape then affects them. And that's clear enough that, like, organisms create niches. And that's where this started, basically. We're talking about the niches changing the world. And then the world, then they have to re-affect how the animals live and how everything lives. Yeah, so if you have any questions about this was basically just trying to point out that this happens all the time in everything. And anyone who's trying to tell you that, oh, this is the base level, like Dawkins wants to say, the gene is the fundamental level. It is a fundamental level, but is it the fundamental level? No, because you've got bigger problems than just genes, because the genes have to always operate within a system, and the system itself is changing on the outside of the genes. So, yeah, there's a lot of good literature and work going into this stuff. I've seen a little bit of it in the ectogenesis literature I mentioned, and that's the science and study of how babies are born. And so if you look at that stuff, you'll see that they're trying to figure out ways to talk about what it is to be pregnant, and like who, like when do you define someone as the fetus as part of the mother, or is it an individual organism? What is part of what? Like, is it the genes? Is it this sort of macro, like this bigger object that is how the mother affects it? And like, because there's like give and take between the baby the fetus and the mother, because that's how the body works. It's not just a single sort of one-way direction. So there's a lot of stuff going into it. Like, if you look at that, it does not make sense to just look at the genes anymore. It has to look at the whole system to make sense of what's going on. And then the other thing that was interesting here was the social theory is also how people talk about this stuff, and that's how, like, these ideas sort of we've sort of grown out of a lot of these old ideas, but they're still there. We're still thinking about nature, red in tooth and claw, and these economic models that we're talking about when we say, oh, these genes or these groups of organisms were, fitter. It's like a better business or something. So, yeah. Okay, so that was short and massively over complicated. Yeah, but that's what is the plurality of evolutionary worldviews. So cool. Let me know if you have questions. We'll go do another paper or something after this. It'll be a little bit of fun.